after 2 years of saying that it's Russian disinformation, after 2 years of censorship with the help of big tech, why now would they start to suddenly validate some of the premise and actual evidence? And I think, unfortunately, it's as the grand jury closes in and more information comes out, I think the possibility and honestly probability of legitimate criminal charges for Hunter Biden only increase.
And now to our top story. First reported by the New York Post and suppressed by Twitter only weeks before the 2020 presidential election. The Hunter Biden laptop scandal is growing. Now, media outlets have obtained and published a purported spreadsheet of Hunter Biden's massive debts and a January 2019 email from his personal assistant, Katie Dodge. The email, dated January 17, 2019, 2 months before Joe Biden launched his presidential campaign, reads, quote, "Hello, VP team. I spoke with Hunter today regarding his bills. It is my understanding that Hunt's dad will cover these bills in the short term as Hunter transitions in his career." The unpaid bills, allegedly covered by Joe Biden, total over $700,000. They include payments of over $1,300 for a month for a Ford Raptor pickup truck, over $1,700 a month for a Porsche 911, $418 a month for a boat loan, $28,000 for tuition to UPenn, $4,000 a month for tuition to the elite Sidwell Friends School in Washington, D.C., $37,000 a month in alimony, and overdue tax payments of $147,000 in 2017, $32,000 in 2016, $157,000 in 2015, all while the crack-addicted Hunter was raking in over $1 million from a Chinese energy firm with close ties to the communist government there, suggesting the Biden family may have been compromised by China. Now, published reports suggest that Biden's pick for Commerce Secretary, former Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo, may have further compromised U.S. national security by lifting restrictions on China's telecom giant Huawei. Huawei, long suspected of embedding spyware in its cell phones and other technology, was placed on the Commerce Department's entities list during the Trump administration, meaning it could no longer buy components from U.S.-made companies without U.S. government approval. But last August, under Secretary Raimondo's leadership, Commerce approved special licenses or exemptions worth hundreds of millions of dollars, allowing the telecom giant to purchase chips for components in its smart cars, such as screens and sensors. The investigative reporting firm, the Government Accountability Institute, has documented that Raimondo's husband is a top executive at a Silicon Valley artificial intelligence firm, partly funded by a Chinese Communist Party-linked investment firm. And joining us now is Eric Eggers. He is the Vice President of the Government Accountability Institute and co-host of the Drill Down podcast. Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
I want to get to the Gina Raimondo at the Department of Commerce involvement in this potential culpability and relationship to China and all in just a moment. But first, I want to get your reaction to these latest Hunter Biden revelations, the spreadsheet and the email from his executive assistant to the staff, the vice president office staff. What do you make of it all? What most strikes you about that spreadsheet, about the email?
Well, I think the thing that strikes me the most is every new piece of information doesn't make Hunter or, unfortunately, President Biden look any better. In fact, the opposite's true. Every time there's another email that's validated, every time there's another piece of information that comes out, the relationship between the President of the United States and his son and his business dealings with shady characters all over the world only become more intermingled. And that's really bad news for the president. And honestly, it's really bad news for the country, because what it means is the president is potentially de facto business partners with foreign governments and some of the worst characters you could imagine in the international financial world. You know, Hunter Biden's not doing business with Lloyd's of London. He's not doing business with the most reputable Fortune 500 companies or the international version of that. He's doing business with and taking money from Russian oligarchs, Ukrainian gas companies with prosecutions and scandals looking at them. He's doing business with the government of China. And so if the president's finances are related to that, I think that's worth investigating, and I just wish the mainstream media had started doing this more recently than last month, because honestly, this information's been out there since the last 4 years.
Well, you've been talking on your podcast about how the mainstream media just picked it up recently, and the potential motivation for their picking it up at this particular time. What's your theory?
It's such a good point, because why would, after 4 years of ignoring it, after 2 years of saying that it's Russian disinformation, after 2 years of censorship with the help of big tech, why now would they start to suddenly validate some of the premise and actual evidence? And I think, unfortunately, it's as the grand jury closes in and more information comes out, I think the possibility and honestly probability of legitimate criminal charges for Hunter Biden only increase. And so from a business standpoint, I mean, Doug, you're in the media. It doesn't look very good for you if you've been spending the last 4 years denying a story only to have actual legal proceedings validate the premise. So I think at some point they had to make a business decision, decide to be actual journalists, and start to report on this story and the incredibly meaningful and dangerous implications that the evidence presents.
There's another alternative theory, and it is that the Democratic Party-aligned mainstream press is setting the table for a premature departure of President Joe Biden. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm not a political pundit, but I guess I'd wonder if President Biden leaves, what does that leave us with? Vice President Harris, and she's got her own set of issues. I mean, they could be looking at polling. They could be looking at the fact that they're about to have what's projected to be a landslide. We're about to have Republicans take over the Senate and the House, if the polling suggests that. And honestly, I think from a strategy standpoint, it might be smart for Democrats to do that, because what's going to happen if Republicans do take over? They're going to launch actual investigations. They're going to start doing the things that the mainstream media should have been doing for the last 4 years. They're going to call witnesses. They're going to look at tax records, bank records. And unfortunately, as this spreadsheet reveals and indicates, the things that they find also won't make Joe Biden or Hunter Biden look very good. And by the way, and Doug, you know this because you've been covering this story, it's not just a Hunter Biden problem. Joe Biden's got a variety of relatives, including a couple brothers, who, I mean, this is the Biden business model. They cash in when Joe Biden's in position of influence. So they've got business dealings, too, that I think are worth scrutiny. You
know, if you look at this Hunter Biden laptop information, if you look at there's thousands upon thousands of incriminating emails and really, really graphic, disturbing video. I've looked at some of this stuff, and it demonstrates really how compromised Hunter Biden was. He was in the throes of just a terrible, terrible addiction that would have thrown any father into turmoil and would have caused most fathers to race to their son to get him out of this plight. Instead, his father was running for the presidency of the United States at a time when his son was completely compromised with all of these business dealings for which he had no expertise whatsoever. He had no energy experience, either with Chinese businessmen or with Ukrainian businessmen. It's plainly obvious what these foreign governments were seeking in Hunter Biden, and that was access to the soon-to-be president of the United States.
Oh, it's so well stated. And remember the timing. Remember, how did Hunter Biden get in business with China in the first place? He flew with his father, then Vice President Joe Biden, on Air Force Two to China on official state business. And Joe Biden is meeting with top Chinese officials. It's unclear what Hunter Biden's doing. There's a few photos that have surfaced, but we know he was having his own private meetings. There's a famous picture of him and Joe eating ice cream, because always ice cream with the Bidens. But then what happens? Less than 2 weeks later, from that trip on Air Force Two, that's when the business deal between Hunter Biden's firm, of what you noted was not exactly reputable in the international financial world, and the government of China launched what would become a $1.5 billion joint financial venture. So I think it's never been hard to separate Hunter Biden from Joe Biden's professional position. And unfortunately, what the evidence is now indicating, and again, at the Government Accountability Institute, we've been reporting on this for the better part of 4 years. What the evidence continues to indicate now is that, unfortunately, it's not just the political fortunes of Joe Biden and the personal fortunes of Hunter Biden that have been intermingled. It's the personal fortunes of Joe Biden and the personal fortunes of Hunter Biden that are also increasingly intermingled. They seem related. We've got email evidence now that Joe Biden's paying some Hunter bills and vice versa. And I think it's incredibly troubling, and I'm glad that for the first time in a long time, the mainstream media is paying attention, and unfortunately for the Bidens, law enforcement appears to be paying attention as well.
Let's talk about Joe Biden's finances, because these emails suggest that he's going to pick up the tab for over $700,000 that Hunter Biden has incurred and is unable to pay because of his addiction and financial state himself. Joe Biden is a government employee. What was his salary as vice president? I don't know what it was, but maybe at most $400,000 or so. We're talking $700,000.
You know, it's funny, Doug. Today's actually, as you may know, take your child to work day, and my son Elijah is just off camera, and he's listening right now. And I just don't want him to get any indication that I will ever pay $700,000 for anything he does, because his father doesn't have it like that. You wouldn't think that Joe Biden does either. And so the fact that he was able to, I think it's such a good point. This is a man that spent all of his time taking the train from Delaware. This is Lunch Bucket Joe. And all of a sudden, he's got 700 large to be able to bail out his son. Now, we know Hunter's had a history of having to be bailed out. There's been famous stories about him abandoning drug-addled rental cars in Arizona with his deceased brother's attorney general badge from Delaware, and then the FBI and Secret Service have to come bail him out. So this is unfortunately not the first time that Hunter's had to be bailed out by a family member from an unfortunate situation. But the fact that Joe Biden, and if these emails are accurate and these financial records are accurate, if Joe Biden has access to that kind of capital, I think that's absolutely the next question that these forensic auditors and law enforcement officials should ask. How exactly did this happen, and where did the money come from? It's the age-old adage, follow the money.